Section 3 of The Lost Oases by Ahmad Muhammad Hassanayn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4. Supplies and Equipment. The 21st found me disembarking at Sollum, which is a tiny seaport close to the western frontier of Egypt. There we were to take camel and go by way of Jagbub to Jallo, the important center of desert trade, where our own caravan would be organized and the great trek southward begun. A journey like this of mine always has several starting points, each with its own variety of emotions and experiences. In the dimly lighted, incense-scented room in my father's house, the enterprise was a kind of dream, fascinating in its possibilities, but hardly yet real. At Sollum came the practical reality of assembling stores and equipment, packing and repacking to get everything into the smallest compass and most convenient shape for handling, checking it all over to make sure that nothing had been forgotten, and arranging with camel owners for the first stage of the trip. At Jallo would come the third start, with my own caravan at my back and the road to Kufra, already traversed but by still no means familiar, before me. Then the last setting out of all as I rode out of Kufra, with my face toward the unknown and the unexplored. Abdullahi and Ahmed were already at Sollum with the heavy baggage, and the camels were arranged for, the agreement only awaiting my approval. We proceeded to get our outfit and supplies in order. Some description of the two Egyptians who accompanied me throughout the expedition may be of interest. Abdullahi was a Nubian from Aswan, heavily built, well set up and strong, with a pair of small eyes deeply set that could mask a malicious sense of humor with great indifference or dignity. A man of about 40, he was well educated and knew his Quran well. I met him first in 1914 when he was attached to the Idrisi family in Egypt, and I took an enormous liking to him because of his deeply rooted sense of humor and his loyalty. He was honest, too, extremely honest, and therefore I put him in charge of the commissariat. In Abdullahi's kit, one could always find anything that was needed, from strips of leather with primitive Bedouin needles for mending shoes, to elaborate contrivances for propping up a broken tent pole. He was ready, moreover, with inaccuracies to suit every situation, whether he wanted me to appear to be a wandering Bedouin from Egypt, or a merchant, or an important government official when we landed in the midst of officialdom in the Sudan. Abdullahi had one peculiarity. Between sunset and an hour or two later, it was apparently a most difficult task to keep him awake. Though he might be sitting down, holding a discussion, he would go on dozing as he sat. On one occasion we had just finished dinner, and, it being about the hour, Zerwali, my Bedouin loyal companion who joined our caravan at Jallo, as a joke took a lot of zatar, a strong scent used for flavoring tea, and put it in Abdullahi's tea. In between dozes the latter woke up, tasted his tea, knew what had happened, said nothing, but simply put back his glass. After a while, however, Abdullahi turned around and said to Zerwali, "I believe you are expecting a man to see you. I think I hear him coming." As Zerwali got up to look, Abdullahi quietly changed round the glasses, so that Zerwali drank the highly flavored tea, while Abdullahi dozed off peacefully once more. Abdullahi's business instinct came out at its best when we arrived at inhabited country toward the end of the journey, and we were short of food. He collected all the odds and ends of the caravan, including empty tins and bottles of medicine, even the few used Gillette blades, and bartered them with the natives for butter, milk, spices, and leather. It was Abdullahi also who was greatly upset when I showed my film of the expedition at a lecture given before His Majesty King Fuad at the Royal Opera House in Cairo. When Abdullahi found that he appeared in many of the pictures with a tattered shirt, he resented being shown to his king in such an unsuitable garment, and asked if something could not be done so that he should appear in a shirt that was cleaner and less well worn. Ahmed, too, was a Nubian from Aswan, a slight, wiry fellow who never gave in. He was my valet and cook. Although very well educated, he became a cook because he liked to live a free life. Had he become a religious man, as his father wished, he would have been obliged to lead a model life, and that, apparently, did not appeal to him. He was always cheerful, and though no one in the caravan did so much cursing, the Bedouins did not mind him. At a word that Ahmed said, had it come from any other, there would have been bloodshed. But the Bedouins got accustomed to him, and there was only one row. After his cooking was over, Ahmed used to sit down with the Bedouins and scorn their knowledge of religion. He would prove his superiority by reciting from memory bits of poetry about religion and the Arabic language and some of the Prophet's sayings. Never once did Ahmed fail to make me a glass of tea, even in circumstances of the greatest difficulty. On one occasion, after a whole night's trek, he was suffering badly from a hurt foot, and as we were pitching camp, I told him casually that I did not want any breakfast or tea until I had slept, and ordered him to go to bed at once. Nevertheless, just as I was getting my shelter ready, Ahmed arrived with a steaming glass of tea. He cursed all the Bedouins, but there was no Bedouin in the caravan for whom, if he felt ill, Ahmed would not do everything in his power to give him relief. He had learned gradually the use of such medicines as I had, and frequently, when in doubt, would bring me a little bottle to ask whether it was quinine or aspirin. The requirements for a desert trek are simple, and the list of what one takes with one is almost stereotyped. For food, there are, first of all, flour, rice, sugar, and tea. All the people of the desert are very fond of meat, but naturally it cannot be carried. One must either shoot it by the way or go without. Tea is the drink in the Libyan desert, rather than coffee, and for that there are two reasons. The first is religious, the second is practical. Sayyid Ibn Ali al-Sanusi, the founder of that interesting brotherhood that controls the destinies of the country through which I was to travel, forbade his followers all luxuries. His prohibition included tobacco and coffee, but for some reason did not extend to tea. His followers, therefore, are tea drinkers, if you can call by the same name the delicate aromatic pale fluid that graces the tea tables of Europe and America, and the murky, bitter liquid which sustains the Bedouin on his marches and revives him at day's end. The second reason is that tea is a stimulant to work on, while coffee is not. Tea is the thing with which to finish off each meal of the desert day and to refresh the weary traveler at the end of a hard day's trek, leaving coffee for the less strenuous life of the oasis and the home. After these staples come dates, or perhaps they ought to be put first. The camels live on dates, as does the whole caravan when other foods are exhausted, or when there is no time to halt and cook a meal. But the dates are not the rich, sweet, sugary things one is accustomed to for dessert or a picnic delicacy in Western lands. The date which one must use for desert travel has little sugar about it. Sugar breeds thirst, and where wells are days apart, the water supply is not to be prodigally spent. I took some tinned things with me, bully beef, vegetables, and fruits, but tins are heavy, and to carry enough food in tins for a long trek would demand a score of extra camels or more. There was a little coffee in our stores, but we seldom drank it. I used most of it for presents to the friends we made along the way. A few bottles of malted milk tablets proved useful as emergency lunches when food ran low. The Bedouins, however, were not keen on them. "They fill us up," they said, "without the pleasure of the taste." That was our commissary list, except for salt and some spices, especially pepper for the asida, a pudding of boiled flour and oil made pepper hot. There was little variety, but variety is the one thing one has to give up when one's supplies are to be carried by animals who must themselves live cheaply on what they can carry. There were no luxuries, no matter how pleasant they might have been to relieve the monotony of rice, unleavened bread, dates, and tea. If one has experience in desert travel and the wisdom to learn by it, one takes no foods of which there is not enough to feed everyone in the caravan. On the trek in the desert, there is no distinction of rank or class, high or low. The sole exception to the rule of no luxuries was tobacco. Since only one of my men who were with me at any time on the trip smoked, however, this was no real violation of the rule. A stock of Egyptian cigarettes and tobacco afforded me constant pleasure and comfort throughout the journey. Next comes water, the one great and unceasing problem of desert travel. Men have lived for an unbelievable number of days without food, whether from necessity or from curiosity, but the man who could go for 4 days without water would be a miracle. A desert is a desert just because it lacks water. The desert traveler must think first of his drinking supply. We carried water in 2 ways. The regular supply was held in 25 girbas, the traditional sheepskin water carrier of the desert. Each holds from 4 to 6 gallons and is easily burst if 2 camels carrying girbas bump together in the dark on a rocky road. So the reserve water supply for emergencies is carried in fantasses. They are long tin containers, oblong or oval-shaped in cross-section, to hang easily along the camel's side. We had 4 fantasses holding 4 gallons each, and 4 others holding 12 gallons each. Our full supply, therefore, was something like 200 gallons, enough to last our caravan, when it was finally organized, on the longest trek from well to well that we were likely to encounter. We carried only our reserve supply in fantasses, although they were less liable to injury because the girbas, when empty, took up so little space. All 25 of them could be carried on 1 camel, while only 2 fantasses went to a camel, full or empty. We had no camels to spare. There were also some individual water bottles, but most of them were soon discarded because the men hated the nuisance of carrying them. A few were kept for cooling water later on in the journey when the weather became hot. The evaporation of the moisture through the canvas sides of the bottles or bags kept the water within at a pleasant temperature. 4 tents, 2 bell-shaped and 2 rectangular, and numerous cooking utensils, of which the chief was a huge brass challah, or bowl for boiling rice, made up the tail of our equipment. For emergencies, there was a medicine chest with quinine, iodine, cotton, and bandages, bismuth salicylate for dysentery, morphine tablets and a hypodermic syringe, anti-scorpion serum, which was to plunge me into an apparently serious predicament and rescue me from it, zinc ointment for eczema, indigestion tablets, and Epsom salts. I had a primitive surgical kit and a few dental instruments and remedies which a dentist friend had given me. I was equipped to take care of the simple everyday ills. If anything more serious befell, I should have to say, recovery comes from God. For hunting and possible defense, I took 3 rifles, 3 automatic pistols, and a shotgun. By the time of our return, the shotgun had been given as a present, and the rest of the arsenal had been increased by 6 rifles and 1 pistol. When the rifles arrived at Sollum in their characteristically shaped boxes, it was immediately rumored through the town that I was carrying a machine gun for some mysterious purpose which gossip elaborated to suit itself. In order to make the report of what I found and saw as vivid and truthful as possible, I took 5 cameras. 3 of them were Kodaks, which functioned perfectly to the end. 1, a more elaborate instrument with a focal plane shutter, which was ruined by the penetrating sand, and the last, a cinema machine. For all the cameras, I carried Eastman Kodak films, which were packed with elaborate care, first in airtight tins, then in tin cases, sawdust-filled, and finally in wooden boxes. These precautions in packing proved to be none too great in view of the intense heat of the first part of the route and the rain and dampness which we encountered later on in the Sudan. For the cinema camera, I took 9,000 feet of film. Fortune was with me in all the photographic work. The films were not developed until my return 8 months later to Egypt, but the percentage of failures was gratifyingly low. For clothing, I took the usual Bedouin garb of white shirts and long drawers, both made of calico, and a woolen jerd, the voluminous Bedouin wrap. Also silk jackets and waistcoats and cloth drawers, like riding breeches but reaching to the ankles. The latter were used only on ceremonious occasions, such as entering or leaving an oasis. There were naturally a few changes of each. I did not wish to put on the desert dress until the end of the first stage of the journey, so I left Solemn in an old khaki coat and riding breeches, which had already seen their best days. With yellow Bedouin slippers on my feet, the only possible wear in desert travel, and a Jaeger woolen nightcap on my head, for the weather was keenly cold, I must have been an amusing figure when we made our start. When traveling into unknown lands, especially in the East, it is important to be able to make presents to those of prominence whom you meet. I had what seemed to me an enormous supply of silks, copper bowls, and censers inlaid with silver, bottles of scent, silk handkerchiefs, silver teapots and tea glasses, silver call bells, which the Bedouin is delighted to be able to use for summoning his slaves, instead of the usual clapping of the hands. When I saw all this array being packed, I felt sure we should bring back half of it with us. But by the time we had reached Kufra, I discovered that not only those who were of use to me this time, but everyone who had rendered the slightest service on my previous trip was expectant of a reward for services rendered. What with postponed expectations and the opportunities which the present trip afforded me for making presents, we had none too many of the goods I have mentioned. In making these gifts, however, I did not feel that it was so much an endeavor to smooth the way of my expedition as a courtesy from a Bedouin of the town to his brother Bedouin of the desert. Most important of all for the ultimate value of the expedition, if it was to have any, was the scientific apparatus, which is detailed in Dr. Ball's report in the appendix. The fortnight at Solemn was filled with busy days. Simple as our equipment was, everything had to be as nearly right as thought and care could achieve. Things carried on camelback, put on each morning and taken off each night, and built into barricades against the weather and possible attacks, must be snugly and securely packed. At the end of a day's trek, careless or tired camelmen often find it easier to let boxes and bundles drop without ceremony from the camel sides than to handle them with proper care. End of chapter 4.